This particular machine was old and war-battered, with corrosion showing on exposed armor and the paint streaked and scratched. More likely the battle mech of a down-on-his-luck mercenary who'd signed on recently with the Iron Hands than that of an Iron Hand senior officer. Still, the Cyclops was a decent mech with heavy armor and adequate weaponry, and a serious danger in that 4-abreast charge lumbering up the ramp. It also had a weakness exploited by every experienced mech pilot who faced it. That odd, even funny-looking head with its staring Tacticon scanner disc that gave it the appearance of a one-eyed giant was vulnerable, and knocking it out could cripple the entire fire control system. Operation Excalibur, page 274, by William H. Keith, Jr. Across the pantheon of 3025 technical readout battlemechs, the Cyclops is often overlooked. Not because of any inherent faults or lack of style, but because battlemechs like the Atlas, Banshee, Stalker, and Battlemaster tend to suck all the oxygen out of the room. The CP-10Z Cyclops was not built to smash through front lines and grab the spotlight. It was the machine built for a specialized purpose. It was the conductor, and battlefield coordination was its music. When Stormvanger Assemblies Unlimited answered the Star League Defense Force call for a new assault battlemech in 2710, the engineering team was confident that they could deliver a winner. Assault battlemechs like the Victor, Battlemaster, and Stalker had paved the way for general-purpose assault designs, and the Cyclops was intended to wrangle all of them. That was accomplished through the use of a cutting-edge Tacticon B2000 battle computer which provided the Cyclops' Mechwarrior with unparalleled battlefield insight. Combined with the Olmsted 840 communication system and Tacticon Tracer 280 targeting and tracking system, the CP-10Z Cyclops was an unparalleled mobile command unit. Weighing in at 90 tons and carrying a massive Hermes 360 fusion engine, the Cyclops was intended to be capable of keeping up with mainline troops. Leading from the front, or at least near it, was the name of the game. There, the Cyclops' Mechwarrior could give commands and relay information up the chain to those who could sway the tide of battle with it. The 64 km/h top speed was respectable, and most felt it was worth the 33-ton engine mass. The significant trade-off for the Cyclops had to be made with the addition of just 10 tons of Starshield special plate armor. This was significantly less than its fellow 3025 assaults like the Battlemaster, which carried 14.5 tons, and the Stalker, which carried 13.5 tons. We say it so often that it's become a bit of a trope, but opportunity cost spares no one. The Cyclops' speed and weapons loadout had to be paid for somewhere. Speaking of weapons, this is where the stated purpose starts to conflict with what the loadout would suggest. The command battlemech, which was intended to stay with the pack or slightly behind the front lines, was given a Zeus 36 Mark II AC-20 autocannon placed into the right torso and fed by 4 tons of ammunition. Additional close-range weaponry was added in the form of a Hovertech short-range missile 4 rack added to the center torso and fed by a single ton of ammunition in the same location. 2 diverse optics Type 20 medium lasers were split between the left and right arms, and finally the only real long-range weapon on the mech was an LRM-10 added to the left torso and fed by a single ton of ammunition stored along with it. With 12 heat sinks, the Cyclops didn't suffer from heat issues unless the AC-20 was brought into play. Generating 7 heat per shot, the autocannon in conjunction with the medium lasers and SRM launcher left the mech at 6+ into the red, which isn't great, but in the heat of the moment, it would likely be worth it. Unlike many other 3025 TRO designs, heat wasn't a major concern. Overall, the Cyclops 10Z was kitted out in what would be expected from a short-range brawling assault mech rather than a standoff command mech. The rationale for it was that the Cyclops could handle threats which closed on it, even if not actively seeking close-range fights. I'm not going to quibble with it, and we'll see how things look when we examine the future variants. 4 tons of AC-20 ammunition on a mech without case is a lot, just saying. The mixture of mass, weaponry, and the high-tech comm gear made the Cyclops popular among officers and battlefield commanders. Very often, the mech would be included in a lance of other assault mechs, which could make up for the Cyclops' shortcomings at range and absorbing incoming fire. The SLDF snapped up quite a few, and by the collapse of the Star League, the Cyclops could be found among the militaries of every great house. A moment later, an autocannon round missed the Cyclops and hammered another helpless building in a shower of glass and steel fragments. The Cyclops turned, visibly surprised, and spotted the UrbanMech firing from the middle of the bridge. Breaking into a run, the Cyclops first answered with long-range missiles. Still, the UrbanMech held its ground, firing again and missing a second time. The Cyclops began to close the range quickly, and a second missile volley peppered light damage on the UrbanMech's left arm stub. Just as the Cyclops was entering the long range for its hip-mounted heavy autocannon, the UrbanMech hopped off the bridge and began retreating down 5th Street. Not to be denied, the Cyclops Mechwarrior deftly angled his charging beast so that it careened off the bridge and managed to keep its feet even as it fell 12 meters from the bridge down onto 5th Street. As it rose from a crouch, it leveled the maw of the heavy autocannon at the slow UrbanMech trying to back up. Hornet's Nest, page 137, by Craig Earn. BattleTech, 25 Years of Art and Fiction. The Cyclops 10Z was a hit, and the Stormvanger Assembly's factory on Cafe continued to pump out the new mechs up until its destruction in 2774 during the traumatic removal of Ameris' defenders from the planet. As the Inner Sphere descended into the mindless destruction of the Succession Wars, they would have to do so without any new Cyclopses. Before we get into the variants and other history further down the timeline, I do want to point out an interesting refit known as the 10HQ. It was functionally identical to the 10Z except for the removal of the AC-20 autocannon. In its place, a collapsible command vehicle module was added to allow for the Cyclops to be a true mobile command unit. Once the mech moved into position, the CCVM could be deployed in less than 15 minutes, offering commanders a fully functioning headquarters. This variant strikes me as a great narrative campaign mech, either as a target or a prize to be captured. It makes all the rusted gears in my brain turn. The first Succession War was unkind to these specialized variants, and the overall number of Cyclops mechs spotted in the field declined significantly over time. Those 10Zs that remained were often sheltered from enemy fire. So while it became increasingly rare as the Succession Wars progressed, the surviving mechs were well cared for. Unfortunately, one of the major selling features for the Cyclops, the B2000 battle computer, increasingly suffered breakdowns and understandable wear and tear over hundreds of years. It essentially became lost tech until the Helm memory core discovery, when attempts were made to repair and replicate the technology. When the C3 computer networking technology was developed, the B2000 research was largely abandoned. Two notable Cyclopses with functioning B2000 battle computers were owned and piloted by Major Wolfgang Hansen and his father Colonel Gerhard Hansen. Their name should ring a bell as both were part of the famous Hansen Rough Riders mercenary organization in the early decades of the 31st century. Though Wolfgang had proved himself as a capable leader and mechwarrior, a particularly devastating defeat against the Combine's 5th Sword of Light on Pike 4 resulted in a delay in Wolfgang's ascendancy to full command of the regiment. The next 5 years of Wolfgang's career was spent in intense training to eventually take over for his father. He spent many hours with Gerhardt to refine his leadership and battlefield command skills. It was reported that Hansen said, "My father stuffed 20 years of experience into my head in 5 years." Sure enough, that investment seemed to pay off as Wolfgang demonstrated an impressive victory in a raid against the Capellan-held world Ares in 3044. Wolfgang's Cyclops was upgraded over the years, but was best known as the 11A variant, which was the Helm Memory Core Field refit kit made available in 3045. As an out-of-production battlemech, the refit for the Cyclops didn't stray too far from the original due to the cost and technological challenges of messing with a battlemech's internal structure. This was especially true for the Cyclops with its complex and unique electronics package. The 11A retained the 460 movement, 10 tons of armor, and 12 heatsinks, but did the swap from the AC-20 autocannon in the right torso to a Gauss rifle with 2 tons of ammunition. This vastly improved the long-range punch for the Cyclops and better fit with the original purpose of creating a command battlemech that could reach out and smack someone if necessary. The Cyclops got involved in the fight, blasting armor away from the thug's left leg and breast with its heavy, powerful Gauss rifle. A sharp, squealing tone screamed in Cristobal's ears, telling of a missile lock. The HUD's threat indicator told the tale. The Cyclops had locked both of its missile launchers onto Cristobal's battered thug. In a last desperate bid for survival, Cristobal reached above his head and yanked hard on the pair of yellow and black striped handles. The ejection seat and the Cyclops fired in the same instant. Dagger Point, page 168 by Thomas S. Gressman. Wolfgang Hansen built a reputation for savvy leadership throughout the 31st century, even through the personal tragedy of his family being killed in a brutal act carried out by the Taurian Concordat. This led to a nearly decade-long vendetta where the Rough Riders trashed Taurian Concordat holdings and defense industries. Ultimately, it required the threat of nuclear weaponry to end the rampage. Though Hansen's Rough Riders would nearly be destroyed during the Word of Blake kerfuffle, Wolfgang refused to give up. By the time he died in 3108, the famed mercenary unit was once again a premier force. Wolfgang's Cyclops survived the mayhem and was passed on to his son Wolf and then on to his granddaughter Freya. Now, before you head off to the comments section to point out that I missed a variant on the timeline, please don't panic. We're going to take a quick hop back to the exciting year of 2801 for the Cyclops 10Q. This refit was a significant change from the original 10Z because of the swap in weaponry as well as some hardware. The 10Q sacrificed the awesome drawing power of the AC-20 in favor of a second LRM-10 launcher in the right torso, along with 2 more tons of ammunition. This freed up enough mass for 2 additional heat sinks and 7 tons of armor, bringing the total protection to 17, or 272 points. This Cyclops was suddenly much more viable in a brawling situation at mid-range, but at the cost of significant pinpoint punch. The argument could be made that the Cyclops 10Q is a more survivable command mech, but fans of the AC-20 are going to be super cranky about the swap to the LRM-10 and the additional medium laser. They have a point, as the overall punch is quite muted for a 90-ton battle mech. General Ariana Winston sat at the controls of her modified Cyclops, gazing at a large secondary monitor set into the left side of the front cockpit. Unlike the normal CP-11A, her mech had been refitted at her request to mount a second console. The mech's short-range missile launcher and its ammunition magazine had to be sacrificed to shoe in the second cockpit into the already jammed interior, but the trade-off was worth it. Having a highly skilled communication and sensor operator behind her relieved some of the pressure on Winston, allowing her to concentrate on the job of running the battle and piloting the rather cumbersome 90-ton machine. Sword and Fire, Twilight of the Clans, Volume 5, page 160, by Thomas S. Gressman. My favorite bit of Cyclops fluff is the report of the Red Jack Ryan raid on Alcalarops in 2801. Based out of the notorious Butte Hold, Red Jack Ryan was the scourge of neighboring systems. In this case, the defenders were the 32nd Lyran Guards, who were led by Brigadier Carson Enright, who gave orders from the cockpit of his Cyclops 10Z. The Lyran officer was well known for using unorthodox tactics to undercut enemy offensives and preserve the lives of his own forces. This, of course, made him very popular among his troops. Using the advantage of defense and knowing the likely target of the raid, Enright hid his battlemech forces and set an ambush for the pirates. When they advanced into a narrowing bit of terrain, mining charges were triggered, which buried several of the pirate mechs and disoriented the others. That's when Enright marched his Cyclops out of its hidden position, and he and his men routed the pirates. Red Jack Ryan's forces retreated to their dropships and left the planet empty-handed. It was a rare loss for the legendary brigand. There were 2 more variants for the Cyclops before Tukiad, and one of them is a command console refit of the Cyclops 11A, a sub-variant, if you will. In order to make room for it, a heatsink needed to be shaved off, and a ton of LRM and Gauss rifle ammo were sacrificed. While not horrific, this more specialized command mech would be tied to logistics lines. A long battle would likely leave the Cyclops ADC with just a couple of medium lasers and an SRM-4 to defend itself. Similar to the earlier refit, the ADC would be interesting in a narrative campaign or mission. The other pre-Tukiad variant was the Cyclops 11C. It was identical to the 11A except for the removal of the LRM-10 launcher, which was replaced by a C3 master computer. This was the previously mentioned evolution of the design once the C3 was adopted rather than trying to re-engineer the B2000 battle computer. I don't have much to say about it beyond it being a solid pick if you're looking for a C3 command battlemech very early in the timeline. Retaining the 2 tons of Gauss rifle ammunition bolsters the mech's power and makes it viable for a longer fight. Ian Hawker saw a ghostly Cyclops push its way out of the trees. It was angled left so the clanner could see the 31 painted on the SRM box on its torso. This was one of the static hurlers of the Comstar's 8th Army. The Sharks had managed to crush the 85th Division, but not the 31st and 56th. The Cyclops was often used as a command mech. This might be the division commander himself. Good. Always Moving, The Battle of Tukid Anthology, page 128, by Stephen Mohan, Jr. It would be 8 long years before the next Cyclops variant, but the wait would prove to be worth it. Under contract with Comstar, Grumium Creations, based out of the Grumium system within the Russelhog Republic, completely rebuilt the Cyclops from the ground up, taking advantage of endosteel, 11 double heat sinks, and 15 tons of ferrofibrous armor. It retained that 460 movement speed with the standard engine, thankfully. Besides the extra armor, the weight savings was invested in a modest weapons upgrade in what would be a fairly typical loadout for the Cyclops moving forward. The Gauss rifle in the right torso was no surprise, but this time it would have case protection. The LRM-10 in the left torso was fed by a single ton of ammunition, also stored in that right torso. The traditional medium lasers split between the arms were upgraded to the ER variety, and the SRM-4 in the center torso was upgraded to a streak system. The ammunition for it was also stored in the right torso to take advantage of case. Overall, the Cyclops 11G is finally the mech that is pretty close to an ideal form. Its one significant downside was stacking all of the ammunition into the right torso with case, which made the mech vulnerable to shots that might leave the mech alive, but only armed with a single ER medium laser once the case does its job. While not completely defenseless, what good is a 90-ton mech with a single ER medium laser? Enraged by the cold-blooded murder of her trooper, Winston shoved the Cyclops control sticks forward with such force that the black metal and plastic devices should have sheared off in her hands. The 90-ton machine covered the ground in a lumbering 65 km/h run. Before the clanner could turn away from the burning mechanical corpse at its feet, Winston slammed a flight of missiles into its relatively thin dorsal armor. A glittering basketball-sized Gauss slug added to the damage. The big Omnimech staggered, lurching forward involuntarily, then, recovering its balance, the enemy machine turned to face its attacker. Shadows of War, Twilight of the Clans, Volume 6, page 87, by Thomas S. Gressman. In 3059, the Cyclops variant started to go a little off the well-trodden trail. The 12K variant also benefited from endosteel and 12 double heat sinks, but didn't go as far with ferrofibrous armor. This time there was just 13.5 tons of standard plate, which split the baby a bit between the 10Z and the 11G. The 12K's primary weapons were an Ultra AC-10 autocannon in the right torso and a medium-range missile 20 rack set into the left. The 2 tons of UAC-10 autocannon ammunition and the 1 ton of MRM-20 ammo all benefited from case installed into the side torsos. 2 ER medium lasers were split between the arms, and the build was finished off with a Streak SRM-4 set into the center torso and fed by a ton of ammunition in the left side. This was Grumium's second bite at the apple to produce a modern Cyclops, and arguably it's a much more flexible build with a higher damage potential at mid and short range. As great as the Gauss rifle was for evening the playing field against the clans, the Ultra AC-10 provided flexibility in how to address a threat. For example, if your foe is wearing a hockey mask, double tap that autocannon trigger just to be sure. In 3064, a variant designated the Cyclops 11H was spotted among the forces of the nefarious Lady Death Trevelyan. The mech had a standard structure, 12 double heat sinks, and was protected by 12 tons of ferrofibrous armor. The presence of the original AC-20 in the right torso, along with the 2 standard medium lasers in their traditional arm locations, suggests the 11H was a refit from an original 10Z. In place of the 2 missile launchers, 6 rocket launcher 20s were added to the mech, 4 in the left torso and 1 in each arm. These potentially powerful weapons are single fire and have a +1 accuracy penalty. The prospect of evaporating an opponent under a hail of dozens of rockets, if not all 120 at once, is sure to tempt all but the most conservative of mech warriors. The downside was that until you're in close range, the Cyclops 11H was unable to return incoming fire. Additionally, once those rockets are expended, it's a 90-ton battle mech with an AC-20 and 2 standard medium lasers. I haven't played with the 11H before in a game, but I think I might need to soon. Twisting at his torso, Arthur pinned the fallen mech with a blistering salvo of lasers and autocannon, and almost welcomed the heat surge that followed. Tancred added to the Kurita Mechwarrior's misfortune, saving his Gauss slugs but flaying off almost a full ton of armor with his PPC and medium lasers. Then he lifted one cloven metal foot and smashed it down into the Kintaro's bulbous head, turning the cockpit into a tangled ruin of metal and flesh. "Not too sporting," Arthur said. "Wrong career or wrong world," Tancred shot back. "Take your pick. Now let's— Arthur!" The warning was a second too late. The Cyclops had already delivered a gut punch with its Gauss rifle, and the Panther a cerulean stream of energies from its PPC. With a violent shudder that wrenched one control stick from Arthur's hand, the Enforcer 3 doubled over and went down in a sprawling slide. Patriots and Tyrants, page 90, by Lauren L. Coleman. In 3071, the Cyclops train ran completely off the tracks with the 11B variant. While at a glance it might not look that different from previous entries into the Pantheon, the 11B manages to cram 2 Gauss rifles into the mech's side torsos thanks to 13.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor and a downgraded 270 fusion engine. This dropped the movement profile for the 11B to just 350, which is a tough cracker to swallow for some. The 2 Gauss rifles each have 2 tons of ammunition, and each side torso was given case to prevent those rifles from causing too much damage if they were critically hit. Backing up the dual Gausses was an LRM-10 in the left torso, which was fed by 2 tons of ammunition. 2 standard medium lasers were split between the arms, and an SRM-4 was nestled into the center torso. With 10 double heat sinks, heat generation isn't an issue, and there was plenty of ammunition for all of the weapons. The major downsides, besides the drop in speed, was the need to leave the SRM-4 ammunition in the center torso due to the lack of critical locations in the side. Technically, the designers could have moved the LRM-10 to the left arm and made room, but we can't have everything we want in life, can we? The 11B is undoubtedly a much more powerful battle mech, but personally I think it gives up too much of what made the Cyclops unique in sacrificing that larger engine. If you disagree, please do head down to the YouTube comments to yell at me. I do so love that sweet engagement. Hopping down to 3073 to the next variant, the Cyclops 11C2 returns to a more comfortable 460 movement profile, as well as a standard frame and 12 tons of standard plate armor. What might initially look like a return to a more primitive form takes a turn with a swap to an ER-PPC in the right torso instead of a large ballistics weapon. I can almost hear the Cyclops fanboys and girls out there recoiling in horror. The PPC was backed up by 2 ER medium lasers split between the arms, 2 standard medium lasers in the left torso, and a Streak SRM-4 launcher set in the center torso along with its 1 ton of ammunition. Finally, not 1 but 2 C3 master computers were added to the mech, 1 in each side torso. If you're curious like I was about it, the second C3 master computer allowed the C2 to run a Lance-level C3 network as well as a company-level link. I'm not a C3 expert by any sense of the word, but I trust the smart people in my Discord channel who explained it to me like I was 5. Normally, the Cyclops don't have to worry about heat generation, but the C2 did thanks to the energy-heavy build. The 14 included double heat sinks did their job for the most part, but a full alpha strike on the run did leave the mech at 8+ heat into the red, so care did need to be taken in those stressful moments of close-range conflict resolution. Since we're just leaning into this C3 thing like a teenage mech frog discovering double-stuffed Oreos for the first time, the Cyclops 11C3 hit the scene in 3077 and once again featured a C3 computer. However, this time it was a boosted master version of the system. This version of the computer was created by the Davions in 3073 and apparently was capable of resisting the effects of electronic countermeasures for all but the Angel ECM system. It was quite a big investment as it weighed in at 6 tons and filled 6 critical locations. I'm just going to sit here for a second and ponder the futuristic computer that weighs 6 tons. Alright, moving on. The Cyclops 11C3 had a standard internal structure, 10 double heat sinks, and carried heavy ferrofibrous armor for the first time. 12 tons of the stuff provided 238 points of protection. For weapons, the build is much more traditional than the C2, with a Gauss rifle in the right torso without case and 2 tons of ammunition. 2 ER medium lasers were once again split between the arms, and that old reliable Streak SRM-4 was set into the center torso with its ammunition. Beyond the heavy ferrofibrous, there's not much new stuff to say about the C3. It works and would be a solid entry into a C3 network force. The major drawbacks include the weight of that computer, limiting damage output, and the lack of case in that right torso, and of course the streak ammunition in the center torso offsets the benefits of that heavy ferrofibrous armor a little bit. It's something to ponder when gazing lovingly at the opportunity cost chart. The last official variant marched onto the scene in 3147 at the dawn of the IlClan era. It also has a very Spartan designation of Cyclops C. Once again, it was Grimium Creations leading the way with the production of this update to the beloved chassis, but this time with the added advantage of being within the technological umbrella of the Rasalhague Dominion. Thus, the Cyclops C was actually a full Clan-tech design.
Oh, that's terrible.
You seem kind of psyched.
No, I'm bummed. But I wasn't bummed. I was stoked.
It was constructed from endosteel, maintained the 360 fusion engine, and carried 20 tons of hardened armor. If you need a refresher, each point of hardened armor requires 2 points of damage to destroy, and critical hit rolls against the target carrying a hardened armor have a -2 roll penalty. It also has various other minor benefits to specific types of incoming damage, but the overall idea is that this Cyclops is one tough cookie. The drawbacks to carrying hardened armor include a +1 piloting skill roll penalty and a reduction in the running movement of 1, leaving the Cyclops C at 450 movement. As far as weaponry goes, the C looks a lot like your typical Cyclops, though obviously benefiting from improved clan technology. The Gauss rifle in the right torso benefits from 2 tons of ammunition, and that side torso is also protected by Case 2. Adding to the potential long-range damage was a Streak LRM-10 system in the left torso, fed by 1 ton of ammunition in the Case 2 protected right torso. Some are critical of the Streak LRM systems for being too heavy, but it might help to think of them as not all that different from an LB-10X autocannon. A Clan LB-10X weighs in at 10 tons plus whatever ammunition you commit to it, often 2 tons. The Streak LRM-10 weighs 5 tons plus ammunition, which is probably 1 ton, as you're unlikely to get 12 locks through an entire battle. Yes, the LB-10X does have that -1 to hit advantage, but is it worth the 5 additional tons of mass? This requires some pondering. The tougher question might be to decide if the Streak LRM is worth it over a standard version. With a normal LRM-10 weighing in at 2.5 tons and the Streak being twice that, that means 2.5 tons of mass is exchanged for requiring less ammunition, likely just a single ton. Plus, we have to remember that when a lock is achieved, all the Streak LRMs will hit, foregoing the need for a missile hit roll table. I'm sure there's someone out there who enjoys math who could figure all this out with probabilities and averages, but we all know you aren't watching a Mechfrog video because I'm good at math. 2 ER medium lasers were added to the arms, able to reach out to 15 hexes for their 7 damage apiece, and finally a Streak SRM-4 was installed into the center torso. Its 1 ton of ammunition was also stored in the right torso to benefit from Case 2. With 10 double heat sinks, heat generation is only a minor issue for the Cyclops C. A full Alpha Strike on the run, assuming both missile launchers achieve their lock, leaves the mech exactly heat neutral. Short of being on the receiving end of Inferno missiles, flamers, or plasma fire, this is a cool running Cyclops. He shoved open the side door to the huge reinforced concrete structure. Inside the vast, echoing hangar stood the battlemechs of his company command in 2 silent rows. As he walked the length of the bay, he studied the silent steel monsters flanking him on either side. Standing near the center of the hangar stood his brand new CP-11A Cyclops. Edwin Amis did not believe in omens. He considered himself to be a practical man, not given to flights of fancy. Still, the very sight of the 90-ton assault mech sent a shiver along his spine. Ariana Winston had been piloting such a mech when she had been killed on Huntress. Dagger Point, page 35 and 36, by Thomas S. Gressman. Before we mosey out of this labyrinth and say goodbye to the Cyclops, I do want to take a moment to present a totally non-canon Mechfrog variant. After receiving some feedback on social media suggesting I give the custom variants some background fluff, here we go. Presented to the Chancellor shortly before the ill-fated Capellan march toward IlClan-occupied Terra, the Cyclops 1MF was an attempt to revitalize the classic Cyclops design. Since they're on the opposite side of the inner sphere from Grumian production lines, House Liao was on their own. Series Metals was contracted and challenged to produce a prototype design for a new command mech using the Cyclops as the template. Starting with Endosteel, the classic 360 fusion engine, and 15 double heatsinks, the series designers went out of their way to save mass where they could without making the mech more vulnerable. 16.5 tons of light ferrofibrous armor maxed out the possible protection for a 90-ton battle mech, addressing the long-time complaint about the Cyclops' vulnerability. To further boost the mech's survivability, a compact gyro was installed. The weapons loadout reflected a focus on mid- and short-range combat that is able to address threats that might make it through the front lines and threaten command lances. A plasma rifle set into the right torso, fed by 2 tons of ammunition, provides a return threat to any possible attacker and can slow down units that can do high DPS but run hot. 2 medium-range Missile 10 launchers were added to the center torso. They share a single ton of ammunition, 12 shots apiece, which is stored in the left torso, which also has case 2. Not swaying too far from tradition, 2 ER medium lasers were split between the arms for some added mid- and short-range punch. The last piece of offensive gear was an emotional support ER small laser placed into the open head critical location. The Cyclops 1MF retains all the quirks from earlier variants, including the battle computer, but in keeping with its role as a controller of battlefield nonsense, a Guardian ECM system was included in the right torso. Finally, 2 anti-missile systems were added to the mech's left torso, feeding off a single ton of ammunition as a last-ditch defense from unwanted inter-mech contact. The future of the Cyclops 1MF prototype remains up in the air, along with so much else in the Capellan Confederation following the ill-fated attempt by the Chancellor to yank the rug out from under Alaric. Did no one tell him that the Wolves get to win every time? It's right there in the contract. Fine print. It always gets you. If you're in the mood to try it out, I've included the PDF record sheet for the Cyclops 1MF in the video notes below. So why do we love the Cyclops? There are battle mechs in this IP which excel because they're objectively more successful on the tabletop. The Cyclops isn't one of them. The strength of the Cyclops is in that it makes perfect sense that these battle mech forces would benefit from a frontline commander with expansive tactical control. Not every mech has to be a brawler or fire support badass. There should be a car in every garage, a chicken in every pot, and a Cyclops to watch over us all as we sleep soundly in our beds shaped like a race car, just as the Founding Fathers intended. There are solid variants for the Cyclops as we march down the timeline, and most of them make logical sense as something people might actually try to gain an edge on the battlefield. While obviously not a perfect min-maxed creature, the mech has a uniquely useful purpose in the narrative and scenario battles where it's not just a matter of destroying all the enemy mechs before your last mech warrior is rendered into charcoal. But I'm interested in what you think. Does the Cyclops enter into your mind when you think about the 3025 TRO classic assault mechs, or did this video remind you that it even existed? Do you have a variant that you think is peak Cyclops, or are they all just left grasping in the dark without a ball of twine? Let me know in the comments below and we'll keep the discussion going. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, there should be a few choice options on the screen momentarily so that the nonsense can continue. If you haven't already, hitting that like and subscribe button will make sure that YouTube algorithm is happy, and as a result, you'll be much more likely to see my nonsense in the future. Going that extra step and becoming a channel member or supporting on Ko-fi will go a long way to making sure I can keep this project going a little bit longer. I really appreciate it and the opportunity to do my part for BattleTech. With that, I'll say have an awesome week. Please stay positive, go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.